AIPAC suffering another loss despite spending all of those millions. That's not an organization that believes that its influence is fine and safe in America. That's an organization, AIPAC and the Israel First Lobby, that believe that their influence is in such decline, and no matter how many millions they seem to spend on these primary races, the reality is they're not having their way in the way that they once did. They're not as invincible as they once were. Even worse for AIPAC and the Israel First Lobby is that even candidates that they support, candidates that they back, that they spend money on, when some of those candidates are winning and they're going to Congress and then voting against the Israelis. But even if in these midterm elections, the Republicans lose the houses as a result of Trump's policies, that doesn't mean that the DNC leadership wins. These aren't the Democrats that Chuck Schumer wants to come into the House. That's not a red or blue issue. That's America first versus Israel first. That even if the midterm elections, it swings from red to blue, these aren't the blue that Chuck Schumer wants. And the problem for the DNC leadership is that in those midterm elections, they will squander what they believe to be a golden opportunity to take back the House, because they will not be able to control the incoming members of Congress who might win on the platform of anti-AIPAC, anti-genocide, anti-Israel, and pro-America first. That's how much public opinion has shifted. Asnat Iqbal asked a question on YouTube: how did Thomas Massie lose when there is this growing resentment towards AIPAC and the Israel First Lobby? Does his defeat mean that the influence of Israel First and the AIPAC lobby is not in decline as everybody suggests? I think that when you have to spend $32 million in order to topple Thomas Massie and make a primary in Kentucky the most expensive primary race in American history, and when Haaretz comes out and says that the Kentucky primary is probably one of the most consequential races for Israel, not Kentucky, not America, for Israel. I think that when AIPAC spends $9 million and Israel First Lobby spends millions more in that race to topple Thomas Massie, I think the fact that they had to spend those millions demonstrates that AIPAC and the Israel First Lobby believe that they're in an existential crisis. They believe that this is such an existential fight against public opinion in America that is shifting against Israel. This is such an existential fight that they have to spend those millions not on the main congressional race between Democrats and Republicans, but even on the primaries, that they have to break record after record regarding spending on these primaries just in order to push back against the shift in public opinion that they believe is beginning to cause an existential threat to their influence. So Thomas Massie's defeat demonstrates the extent to which AIPAC and the Israel First Lobby believe that their influence is actually in decline. And that's not the first time they break the record for primary spending. They broke it with Jamal Bowman and Cory Bush. Jamal Bowman, they spent $14 million in order to topple Jamal Bowman. They made it at the time one of the most expensive primary races in American history. The reason they went to punish Jamal Bowman is because Jamal Bowman at the time had voted for the Iron Dome. Jamal Bowman had voted to send weapons to Israel. But Jamal Bowman heard the voices getting louder and louder denouncing the genocide. Jamal Bowman saw that public opinion was shifting. He could see what was happening on social media because people were sharing it. He could see what was happening on the streets because people were protesting. He could see what was happening with the changes taking place in public opinion through the boycotts and the attempts to ban those boycotts on the part of Israel. He could see that more and more politicians were getting heckled about their position regarding the genocide that was taking place in Gaza. So Jamal Bowman decides, okay, I've voted for the Iron Dome, but I don't want to be caught out by this voice that is growing that might translate into political power at the ballot box. So let me hold a stick from the middle. I'll vote with the Israelis in order to protect the Iron Dome, but I'm going to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. AIPAC was so angry at this call for a ceasefire that they decided to spend $14 million in order to topple Jamal Bowman. The reason why they needed to spend $14 million is because AIPAC were concerned that Jamal Bowman's statement in calling for a ceasefire demonstrated that Jamal Bowman was considering that AIPAC might not have the influence it once had. AIPAC might not be as strong as it once was. The Israel First Lobby may not be as invincible as perhaps people perceived it to be, and that this alternative power, because people kept talking about this issue of genocide and why US taxpayer money doesn't go to help ordinary Americans in their medical bills but goes to Israel instead, that the suggestion Jamal Bowman was saying was AIPAC is not as strong as it was before. So AIPAC spends $14 million to teach Jamal Bowman a lesson, and then $8 million to topple Cory Bush. But the point here is not this. The point is this. Why did AIPAC and the Israel First lobby spend that money, and what were they trying to achieve? They were trying to silence criticism of Israel and silence criticism of the relationship between the US and the Israelis. Meaning they were spending those millions of dollars to get people to be so scared to talk about Israel and talk about the US relationship with Israel that congressmen would no longer mention it again, even if it means calling for a ceasefire. That Congress would not even call for a ceasefire. I ask you, have people gone quiet? They haven't. People have only been getting louder and louder and louder and louder. Not only have people got louder and louder, but the more millions AIPAC and the Israel First lobby seems to spend, the more we see in primaries that being pro-Israel is becoming toxic and becoming a liability, while being anti-Israel and anti-genocide is becoming a political asset. That Israel and the Israel First lobby and AIPAC, when now they are spending millions on these races, the candidates that they don't want to win are winning. They didn't want Mamdani to win the mayoral race in New York. They went even to the extent by which the Israel First lobby managed to rally in such a way that it no longer became blue versus red. When Mamdani went up against Cuomo, Chuck Schumer, who's supposed to be blue, found himself in the same ranks as Trump, who's red, in order to back Andrew Cuomo, who ran as an independent because he was rejected by the Democrat-based party. It wasn't red or blue backing Cuomo, it was Israel First backing Cuomo, while America First, they backed Mamdani. And Mamdani ended up winning, even though the likes of Bill Ackman and these others kept funding money against Mamdani, accusing him and turning on him because he said that he would not go to visit Israel and he would stay in New York and invest in New York as well. The point is that the Israel First lobby and AIPAC failed to get their preferred candidate in New York. And not only that, you look at what's happening in New Jersey. In New Jersey, Malinowski was the incumbent. Malinowski, supported by AIPAC, pro-Israel, believes in their right, that Israel has the right to exist. Malinowski could hear what people of New Jersey and the constituents were saying. He could see what was happening on social media. He could see that shift in public opinion. He could see that people in New Jersey were becoming increasingly adamant that their politicians and their representatives make absolutely clear where they stand on one of the great moral issues of our time and where they stand on how US taxpayer money should be spent. That should it be spent first and foremost on a homeless American sitting in Chicago, or should it be given to Israel in order to enable them to continue committing genocide and to uphold the apartheid state? Should US taxpayer money be given to the ordinary American in order to enable them to get their basic groceries, given that 42 million Americans are on SNAP? Or should the money first go to Israel in order to be able to expand into southern Lebanon and go to the Litani River and annex that territory? Where should the money go first? Are you America first or Israel first? Malinowski could hear what was happening in New Jersey as people kept talking about this issue and protesting about this issue and holding events about that issue, and they would relentlessly keep talking about it on social media until the algorithm kept showing it everywhere. Malinowski was not blind to this. He heard it. Well, Malinowski heard it. Malinowski said, okay, I support Israel's right to exist, and I support the Israelis, but I would consider conditioning aid. That was his response to try to react to that shift in public opinion. AIPAC was so angry that Malinowski had done what Jamal Bowman had done. Now think about it just for a second. $14 million and you topple Jamal Bowman. And you're hoping that by spending $14 billion, AIPAC and the Israel First Lobby, they're hoping that by spending $14 million and seeing Jamal Bowman defeated, everybody will look at Jamal Bowman and say, I'm too scared to say anything about Israel or the Israel First Lobby or of AIPAC. Instead, Malinowski knows what happened to Jamal Bowman, but he can see that people keep talking about it. They keep talking about this relationship between the US and Israel, and they keep talking about and asking politicians where they stand on this issue. Malinowski says, I would condition aid. It's a very soft concession that he gives. AIPAC are so angry that after spending $14 million, Malinowski still comes out and is speaking in the same similar language to how Jamal Bowman ended up speaking, that they decide to back another candidate to try to topple Malinowski. Because AIPAC and Malinowski fall out with one another and they start clashing in the election, there is a candidate who's also running who in the beginning had an outside chance, Ana Lilia Mejia. Ana Lilia, anti-genocide, pro-America first. America first here, I'm using it not in the fascist term. I'm using it in the term as that US taxpayer money should be spent on US citizens. It shouldn't be given to Israel to go and commit genocide. Pro-Palestinian, anti-genocide, pro-America first. Ana Lilia Mejia ends up winning that primary in New Jersey. Imagine spending millions to scare the electorate and the candidates running into silence that they should not talk about Israel or Israel first. And instead, the more millions you seem to spend, the more it seems to become a toxic issue in these races. Adam Hamawi, a surgeon in the US Army, a surgeon who decided to run as a candidate on an anti-genocide platform, on a platform in which he called for America first, where US taxpayer money should be spent on Americans first. It shouldn't be sent to a regime that upholds apartheid according to human rights organizations and commits genocide. Adam Hamawi runs in a crowded Democrat race and ends up coming first, demonstrating that being anti-AIPAC and being pro-America, being anti-Israel and being pro-America wins you an election, and that being pro-Israel is no longer the political asset that people once thought it was. So Adam Hamawi and Lilia Mechia, Malinowski ends up losing his seat. Then you spending all these millions still on these primary races, on Thomas Massie. But then you look at Pennsylvania and you find that Chris Rabb ends up winning the primary race again on a platform of anti-genocide and pro-America first, that money should be spent on Americans, on American citizens. It should be spent on American healthcare. It should be spent on benefiting Americans. It shouldn't be going towards Israel. AIPAC suffering another loss despite spending all of those millions. That's not an organization that believes that its influence is fine and safe in America. That's an organization, AIPAC and the Israel First Lobby, that believe that their influence is in such decline, and no matter how many millions they seem to spend on these primary races, the reality is they're not having their way in the way that they once did. They're not as invincible as they once were. Even worse for AIPAC and the Israel First Lobby is that even candidates that they support, candidates that they back, that they spend money on, when some of those candidates are winning and they're going to Congress, they're going to Congress and then voting against the Israelis. Maxine Dexter was supported by AIPAC. She won her seat with the support of AIPAC. She got to Congress and ended up comparing the genocide that took place in Gaza to the Holocaust. She ended up putting her name to Rashida Tlaib's bill that called for a recognition of the genocide in Gaza. She ended up voting against the Israelis and then went to interviews to tell people that AIPAC is toxic. I wish I'd never taken that money is toxic. Imagine you're AIPAC and the Israel First Lobby. You spend millions in order to deliver these candidates. They go to Congress, they read the room, they read the shift in public opinion, they see the change that's taking place on the ground. They see more and more Americans wake up to the reality of the relationship between US and Israel. They see the reality of the complicity in the genocide committed in Gaza and in Palestine and the apartheid regime. And they see the reality of just how much money is going to Israel to support them as opposed to going to ordinary Americans. That these candidates that AIPAC supports, when they get to Congress, they're flipping and they're voting against the Israelis. Chris Menefee, another example. AIPAC celebrated the victory of Chris Menefee. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Americans don't always speak English, they speak American. It's very different. Water. Michael McIntyre has a very good sketch on this where he goes, American is like English, but they needed a bit more explanation. So for example, in the UK, they have glasses, and in America, they call it eyeglasses. They need to know where to wear it. You know, in the UK, we have the pavement. America has sidewalk. In any case, subscribe to The First Move. The First Move is our notes on the events that we're watching, why we're watching them, why we think they're significant. They're notes that we make every morning. These notes can be in your inbox every single morning. All you have to do is go to movecollective.com, subscribe to The First Move, and it will be in your inbox every single morning. This is, after all, your channel. Let's share and discuss the ideas together. Chris Menefee. AIPAC celebrate his win. Here's the tweet. They celebrate that he won. And Chris goes to Congress and ends up voting for the Block the Bombs Act to stop bombs being delivered to Israel for Israel to use against Gaza. Imagine you're spending all this money on these primary races, and imagine that you're spending all this money in order to stem the criticism and the tide that's turning against the relationship between the US and Israel and those who are calling for a change or a re-alteration of that relationship to one that is more balanced. Imagine you spend millions trying to silence these people and you topple congressmen, but the more you seem to spend, the more America seems to turn away from you. That you spend all these millions, but still you find that Americans are talking about you in a way that resembles this SNL sketch.
There is growing confusion over whether Israel being allowed to continue bombing Lebanon was part of the ceasefire with Iran. Ultimately, that decision comes down to the man controlling our military, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Now imagine spending millions on these primary races in order to scare people into silence. But public opinion has shifted so much that people are now manifesting that change at the ballot box, not just in those primary elections, but even the presidential election with Harris, where you have Don Lemon interviewing people who came out and said that I didn't vote for either Harris or Trump, and it had to do with genocide.
My realistic thing is I'm not voting for genocide. So that's what Kamala and Trump are, right? What I hate is genocide, and what I hate is capitalism, and what I hate is seeing marginalized people oppressed. Yeah. So when is the time for us to stand up and say enough is enough? What is your red line?
Not only that, public opinion, despite the millions being spent, you see that AIPAC and the Israel First influence continues to be in decline to such an extent that even when the Democrat leadership, the DNC, want to preserve their relationship with the Israel First lobby, the likes of Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker, and Hakeem Jeffries, and then they release an autopsy report of why the Democrats lost the last election. And when you look through the report, you see that Gaza is not mentioned anywhere. Public opinion has shifted so much that despite having allies in the DNC who believe in the relationship with Israel, the public opinion of America is to react to this autopsy report by saying that this is clearly a nonsense report because it doesn't even mention Gaza, and everybody knows that Gaza was one of the reasons why the swing states like Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia flipped in favor of Donald Trump, and why those states abandoned the Democrats because they could not bring themselves to morally vote for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. Many of them voted for a third party. But the point that I'm saying is that the public opinion has shifted so much that even when the Democrats tried to reframe their defeat in the elections in a manner in which Gaza and their role in perpetuating the genocide did not play a role, American public opinion has shifted so much that ordinary Americans came out and said that, I'm sorry, Democrats, this report is absolute nonsense. Rouhana came out and said Gaza was clearly one of the reasons that we lost. Rashida Tlaib, Gaza was really one of the reasons that we lost. Ilhan Omar said it. A number of other Democrat representatives said it. Bernie Sanders and these others. That's how much public opinion has shifted, despite AIPAC and the Israel First lobby spending millions of dollars to try to get representatives of the Democrat Party not to criticize Israel. AOC comes out and says that the report is nonsense because Gaza clearly did play a role. And the reason why the Democrat leadership released that autopsy report in that way, and why they didn't mention Gaza, is because the DNC is gambling that in these midterm elections, people will be so angry and tired of Donald Trump and his consistent failures, whether it's on the economy, whether it's dragging America into Israel's war against Iran. Even the State Department's website says that America entered at the behest of Israel. That despite that, the DNC believes that as long as they persevere and wait for Americans to get angry with Trump, that in the midterm elections it will swing blue anyway, and they won't need to acknowledge or recognize that Gaza played a role, and that those who perhaps punished the Democrats will come crawling back and say, we're really sorry that we punished you and Trump was really bad and we're going to vote for you again. But the problem for the Democrats is, or the Democrat leadership in particular, is that these midterm elections, the Democrat leadership assumes it will be between red and blue, Republican and Democrat. But even if in these midterm elections, the Republicans lose the houses as a result of Trump's policies, that doesn't mean that the DNC leadership wins. And here's what I mean. The shift in public opinion is such that the battle is no longer between red and blue. It's no longer between the Republicans and the Democrats. Because in those midterm elections, Republicans may well lose a whole number of seats and the Democrats may win those seats. But not the Democrats that Chuck Schumer wants. Not the Democrats that Hakeem Jeffries wants. Not the Democrats that Cory Booker wants. Not the Democrats that Obama wants. Not the Democrats that Biden wants or used to love. That instead the Democrats who might win the seats are the likes of Abdul Sayyid in Michigan, are the likes of Adam Hamawi in New Jersey, are the likes of Anna Lilia Mejia in New Jersey, are the likes of Maxine Dexter, again, this time not on an AIPAC platform, are the likes of Chris Rabb and these others. These aren't the Democrats that Chuck Schumer wants to come into the House. That Chuck Schumer, who stood against Mamdani on the basis that Mamdani would refuse to go and visit Israel, Cory Booker, who stood against Mamdani on the basis that Mamdani would refuse to go to Israel and he'd stay in New York in order to look after the New Yorkers. As a result of Mamdani refusing to be Israel first, Chuck Schumer found himself alongside Trump, alongside Eric Adams, against Mamdani. That's not a red or blue issue. That's America first versus Israel first. That even if the midterm elections, it swings from red to blue, these aren't the blue that Chuck Schumer wants. And the problem for the DNC leadership is that in those midterm elections, they will squander what they believe to be a golden opportunity to take back the House because they will not be able to control the incoming members of Congress who might win on the platform of anti-AIPAC, anti-genocide, anti-Israel, and pro-America first. Marjorie Taylor Greene on the Republican side, when Thomas Massie was fighting his race, she came out and said that the problem now is that the Americans now are finding that they have to fight the party, the Republicans. Who's red between them, Marjorie Taylor Greene or the Republican Party? Talking in red and blue terms doesn't make sense anymore because red and blue are becoming so convoluted that now America is becoming purple. Ordinary Americans are now looking at candidates and saying, where do you stand on the issue that matters to me? I'm one of those Americans, the 42 million who are on SNAP. Are you in favor of sending 328, 382 or however much millions are sent from Florida to Israel, or are you in favor of keeping that 300 something million in Florida to spend on that on the people of Florida? That's what James Fishback is running on in governor's race on the Republican side in Florida, making that anti-AIPAC position into a political asset, which now sees him rising in the polls. It's not clear if he'll beat Byron Donalds, but he's certainly much further ahead than he was before. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie versus Miriam Adelson, Donald Trump, and versus those Republicans, Ted Cruz. Which of them is red here? If you talk in red and blue, it doesn't make sense anymore. If you talk in blue terms on the Democrat side, it doesn't make sense anymore because it doesn't allow you to understand why Cory Booker and why Chuck Schumer don't want Abdul Sayed to win in Michigan. Why they didn't want Mamdani to win in New York. Why they didn't want Adam Hamawi to win in New Jersey. Why they don't want Anna Lilia Mejia to win in New Jersey. That's how much public opinion has shifted. Imagine spending millions of dollars to help congressmen win in their primaries, congressmen and congresswomen. Imagine spending millions, and now you've become so toxic, that now America no longer considers vote blue no matter who or vote red regardless of who Trump supports. They're now looking at where does this candidate stand on the issues that matter to me. They used to say on the Republican side that whoever Trump backs is going to win because there was that Trump cult. But look what happened in the Iowa governor's race. The Trump-backed candidate lost. The Trump endorsement doesn't work in the way that it used to, as Americans turn away from it after accusing Trump of being Israel first as opposed to America first. Imagine you're AIPAC and the Israel First lobby. You spend millions of dollars to stop people criticizing you. Millions of dollars to stop people criticizing Israel. Millions of dollars to put Israel first. AIPAC says it. Here's the tweet. Being pro-Israel is good politics. Ted Cruz saying, I came to Congress to defend Israel. Lindsey Graham going to South Carolina telling them, I'm asking them to send their boys to Israel and I visit Israel every 2 weeks. Imagine spending all these millions of dollars and now Lindsey Graham may even lose his seat in South Carolina because of his support for the Israelis. That's what the polls are suggesting. And if you want further proof that it's not red or blue anymore, AOC came out and said that she will not work with Marjorie Taylor Greene. And everybody saw the backlash when she said it doesn't benefit our movement. The reason AOC got the backlash is not because people think that AOC is less than Marjorie Taylor Greene or that Marjorie Taylor Greene is less than AOC. The reason AOC got the backlash was when she insisted on the movement on the basis that our movement is blue and we vote blue no matter who and whatever and all this stuff. People are rejecting that, saying, sorry, AOC, I'm not voting Democrat anymore on the basis that they're Democrat. I need to see some moral authority. I need to see that they genuinely care about the people that they claim to represent. As Ta-Nehisi Coates said, he goes, if you can't draw the line at genocide, how can I trust you with democracy? People are now asking about specific cases in the sense that it is no longer red and blue. America is becoming purple. It's becoming issue-based, and that is the problem for AIPAC. And that's why, according to Dropside News, the AIPAC is hiding how they are funding the candidates, because they're concerned that if Americans see who they are backing, Americans will vote in a way averse to AIPAC. They'll vote for the candidate that AIPAC doesn't want, and that AIPAC tracker and these other tools are being used by ordinary Americans to say, I want an America first, I don't want Israel first. Who are AIPAC backing? They're backing this one, I'll back the other one. That's a tremendous shift in public opinion. That's why the defeat of Thomas Massie does not suggest in any way whatsoever that AIPAC and the Israel First lobby are in the ascendancy. No, not at all. It demonstrates the desperation that now exists within the ranks of AIPAC and the Israel First lobby. The desperation that all these millions being spent. But the Americans, having heard the voices who continue to speak out, their opinions are changing. Who's red, who's blue now? Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massie. You used to call them red. There was a headline that said Tucker Carlson now is reaching out to the left. Tucker Carlson is not reaching out to the left. Tucker Carlson is talking about an issue that relates to America, a moral issue that relates to America. And people who used to identify as red and blue are gravitating towards that rhetoric, not on the basis of red or blue, but on the basis of something that transcends red and blue. Something that looks a bit more purple, that transcends red and blue. Something that is more akin to America first. And that's why these midterm elections will not be Republicans versus Democrats. It will most likely be America first versus Israel first. It will most likely be America first or foreign government first. It will most likely be, do we listen to Lindsey Graham and send money to Israel while the American economy suffers? Or do we stand by America and try to help those who are struggling within American society itself? And sometimes people will say, maybe you're trying to look for the positive in something that is negative. Perhaps. But I reject that argument. If Israel was so comfortable with its influence in America today, they wouldn't be trying to change the terms of the support America gives. America gives aid to the Israelis, but now Netanyahu and the Israel First lobby are trying to reframe it as an integration of the armies, that we don't need aid anymore, let's just share technology. It's the same thing, but they're repackaging it, rewrapping it. Why? Because they know Americans don't want to give aid anymore to the Israelis. And they are concerned that if it continues this way, they are trying to stem that decline in their influence. That's why Jonathan Greenblatt went to the Knesset and he said, we need to capture TikTok. We're losing the public. We need to capture TikTok. Here it is. You can see it. As after he said that, Netanyahu then said that the purchase of TikTok is one of the most important purchases during this war. Here it is.
And the most important purchase that is going on right now is class?
Followers.
TikTok. TikTok. Number one.
After Netanyahu says it, Larry Ellison gets a consortium to go and buy TikTok for $50 billion. We've been talking this episode about millions. $50 billion. The Israel First lobby is spending in order to control the flow of information that reaches the American people, for fear that public opinion is shifting so much they don't know how to stop that shift. Imagine spending these billions and still you are unable to stop this tide and this shift that has made Israel into a toxic issue and made being pro-Israel something that makes you lose an election. And I always give the parallel sometimes in that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was defeated militarily in the Battle of Uhud. Quraysh came and they defeated the Prophet sallallahu militarily. But the reason that Quraysh felt or didn't revel in the victory when they went back to Mecca is because they didn't achieve what they were trying to achieve in the first place. When AIPAC spent the money, when Quraysh went to defeat the Prophet ﷺ, the aim was to extinguish the message that was being spread across the Arabian Peninsula. It was to make sure that the message would not be spoken again, to make sure Americans don't hear it again, scare them with defeat, punish them with defeat, spend the money in order to defeat them, so that they will no longer speak the message, so people will no longer hear it, so our influence will no longer be under threat, and we can preserve what we have and we can win in time. The reason that the Quraysh didn't feel like they had won at Uhud is because what Uhud demonstrated was that yes, they might beat them on the battlefield, But you do not have the power anymore to extinguish this voice. You don't have the power anymore to stop this wave. You don't have the power anymore to stop that shift in public opinion. You don't have the power anymore to win back that invincible influence that people thought you had before. You don't have the power to crush this movement anymore. You don't have the power to silence these voices anymore. You don't have the power to scare them into silence anymore. That no matter how many small wins you get on the military battlefield, this was the point. The point was the ultimate aim of silencing them will never again be achieved because the times have changed and there's a new generation where now the polls show that more than 50% of young Jews now believe in a one-state solution between the Palestinians and the Israelis. That now the polls show in America that Israel is at a historical low in the Democrat Party and also declining in influence even amongst Republican supporters. And there's a huge gap between the boomers who grew up on supporting the Israelis. Tucker Carlson, when he asked Nick Maynard in the interview, he said, what are Palestinians like? Dr. Nick Maynard said, they're the nicest and most generous people I met. Tucker was oh, what do you mean? We grew up being taught that they were barely human. That generation being taught they were barely human, there's a new generation that sees them as human. The polls show that this is the last legs of the AIPAC and Israel First influence. That's why Quraysh felt they lost in Uhud. They'd won militarily, but what was demonstrated emphatically was they did not have the power anymore to extinguish that message. Just as AIPAC and the Israel First lobby don't have the means to extinguish the message. Thomas Massie's defeat doesn't show that AIPAC and the Israel First lobby still have strength. It demonstrates how desperate they are. That no matter how many millions, they can't silence your voice. They can't silence your social media. They can't silence your protests. And they can't stop Americans from listening to you. And the more Americans listen to you, the more Americans are beginning to manifest their changed views in the ballot box. That in an environment where there is freedom of speech, that is considered sacred, in an environment of freedom without coercion, when Americans hear your voice in a free environment, Americans resonate deeply with the idea that genocide is wrong. They resonate deeply with the idea that money should be spent on my neighbor first before it's sent to go and commit genocide. Money should be spent uplifting my neighborhood first and building infrastructure rather than going abroad in order to go and uphold an apartheid state. When you move, you make a difference, and no millions in the world can stop the impact of that movement. Move, ibadallah. Move. Don't forget to put your questions below. Every episode is dictated by your questions. Put your questions below so I know what we're addressing in the next episode. Share this video. Lift people's spirits. Tell them that they are making an impact and they are having a change. They are making change. Tell them that they are having an impact. Tell them they are changing the world. Tell them that humanity can win. Tell them that people's hearts can flip. Tell them darkness doesn't last and that it's always darkest before dawn. And always see things for what they are, not what you think they are. See the reality. Don't look at the millions and say, oh my God, they have millions. Look at the millions and say, wait a minute, they're spending all these millions, but they're not achieving what they want to achieve. God bless America. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.